Okay.
Going live. Oh man, this is great. I just got this email from somebody being like, I thought you guys were doing it again this week. Where's the email announcing? That's good feedback. That's good feedback. Talk about the right feedback to work with, right? All right, cool. So I'm just going to send them a quick email and just say that this is us now. And I'll just quickly throw it on to good old Facebook. So if you want to just say hello to everybody there, Takota, and give them the old hey-ho and kind of announce what we're going to talk about, I'll do this and then we'll jump back in.
Sounds good. Hey folks, welcome back again. It's Javan and Takota here. Today we're going to be talking about metrics and how if kind of Javan's one liner there, if you're not designing your life, then somebody else is. Of course, one of the great ways of figuring out how to design your life is to set some benchmarks for that. So we're going to be going through some of the processes and frameworks that we use to set metrics in our own lives, and just sharing some stories and feedback with that. So looking forward to it.
Thanks for opening us up here, Takota. As Takota was talking about, we're going to be talking about metrics today. And I think we were probably more prepared in a sense of this is what we're talking about and this is specific. And then as we're going forward, this is more about questions we get or things that are up for ourselves. And so if there are questions on what we're talking about, feel free to go into the YouTube chat and just let us know. Feel free to introduce yourselves. It'd be great to hear where you're from. And we'll go from there. It was great to see everybody last week, and got some great comments last week, which were pretty wild. I was just telling Takota there was a gentleman who really took to heart the idea of context and finding purpose in one's life. And it's pretty incredible when you get that kind of feedback, eh, mate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I get it all the time myself, and this is really important stuff. But it's funny that, in the space that we're working in, which you kind of, the blanket term is permaculture, there's not a lot of other dialogue around this, which I find really very strange, because I had taken 3 PDCs before this had come into, before this was part of the dialogue, and it was you and Rob that were the first guys to kind of bring this onto the radar, and it blew me away.
Metric truth bombs.
Yeah.
Which should be the case anyways, because we should all be in metric anyways. That's Imperial Slam.
Easy now.
No, that's a really interesting idea. Let's start there. I like that idea. I was just speaking with, who was I speaking with? Oh, I was looking at this thing I'm reading this book right now by Yuval Harari, Homo Deus. So it's the sequel to Sapiens, A Brief History of Humanity. Did you read that one?
I'm just starting on it. Yeah, it's really good.
Okay. Prepare for more truth bombs. Many more truth bombs. One of the truth bombs from there that I think we've talked about, because it was something that we talked about when we were working together, was this idea that agriculture is the best way for us to source our food, or it's made us better, quote unquote, better human beings. And by all the metrics from Yuval's conversation, we are not better human beings. We're not as tall as we used to be. We don't have a strong bone density. Infant mortality actually went up after agriculture because we were on a single monocrop, and we lost the ability to interpret the landscape and actually find food and survival food. That whole conversation of survival food doesn't exist in an agricultural concept. And I think that really points to the idea that, and I'm going to swoop back around to metrics. I'm kind of doing this big ride cruise back to metrics, that we really are a silver bullet mentality culture. And if it's not the one thing in front of us, then it can't be anything else. And there's no such thing as silver bullet mentality when we come to ecology. There's multiple ways of looking at a conversation, multiple ways to outflow a conversation at the same time. Like, it's not just one thing. So you can be an agriculturalist and you can also be a hunter-gatherer. you can be an urban gardener, and you can also be a dumpster diver. Like there's all of these pieces that work together. And so when you have those pieces together and you take a look at the myth that agriculture is the best quote unquote way to be, one of the really interesting metrics that was brought up during agriculture is harvest numbers. How many seeds are planted, yield per crop, yield per acre, bushels per acre, storage, wastage, like all of those metrics came out of agriculture, and we replaced how much good sex we had on a day with the hunter-gatherer conversation, the stories we told, the times we spent with our family members for hard and fast numbers. This is not by any stretch of the imagination. We didn't necessarily go from, well, we didn't have numbers at all for hunting, but it definitely became a more prominent fixture in our life when we moved to agriculture. And when I think about the farmers, the gardeners, the designers, the homesteaders I've worked with, they're so focused on doing well that they don't even have a metric in their mind anymore. It's just like, I have to be successful. It's like, okay, well, what does successful mean? Well, it means I'm successful. You're like, yeah, but what's behind that? And so it feels like we've even left the kind of hard and fast metrics that came from agriculture, and we've even gone into more gray area that's more about self-subscribe or societal subscribe metrics. Does that ring true to you, or is that me just kind of rambling on? I may just be rambling.
No, definitely. And I mean, it's like we've been in the rat race so long that we've just forgotten that we're in a wheel. And so it's like, even when we get off, so the kind of a funny story, when I lived in Newfoundland for a year with my folks, the family that we lived beside, they had milk goats. and their strategy for goats are very notoriously hard to fence in. And the saying is that if you throw a bucket of water at a fence and the water goes through, it won't hold goats. Anyway, so these folks found a workaround for this, and they put collars on the goats, like dog collars with a leash, and they had basically these tether lines, like a clotheslines that were spaced. The tether for each goat was, say, 10 feet long, and so they spaced these tether lines 20 feet apart, and so they could just hook a goat onto each tether line, and they could graze up and down these strips, up to 10 feet away. And that's how they did the rotational grazing. Is just every day they hooked him on a different leash. Anyway, something had changed, and they decided that they were going to fence off the paddock or something. And but the goats had been kind of programmed into this, this routine where they got taken from the milk barn up to the pastures and hooked onto these leashes. And anyway, so they one day they went up and they didn't hook them on the leash anymore. And the goats were so happy because they were free, and they were running, through the pasture, but they were running up and down the tether lines.
We're free, except we're still in the same mentality we were from before.
And so I think it's kind of the same as human beings, is just, whatever, 10,000 years of domestication with our culture in various forms. And there's obviously good parts of the domestication that went down, but I think we're really just running up and down the same paths that we were before, and it's time to take a look around and see where the grass is greener.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of a number of conditioning conversations, and one that we've had a lot, which is for the last 15, 14,000 years, when we moved from hunter-gatherer to agriculturalist. We not only started to domesticate seed, and we not only started to domesticate animals, and by no stretch of the imagination am I trying to say that agriculture was the definitive line in the sand between domestication and non-domestication. We were domesticating dogs long before that, and other animals, and vice versa. But once we had agriculture, we had surplus. And once we had surplus, we had to store surplus. And once we had stored surplus, we had to protect that surplus. And so there was all these specialities, this specialization. And what's interesting about that is, as soon as you have those little specialties, you have to force somebody to do something they don't necessarily want to do when they don't want to do it. I'm sure there's some times when the guard was like so happy to guard the grain, so happy to guard the silo. But other times they're like, I just like to go hunting, or I just like to, bugger off and find something else to do. And when you think about that, we have been domesticating humans in that same vein for the last 13, 14, 15,000 years. And this is something that you, I, and Rob have talked a lot about, is that it's funny talking to people about this domestication, because a lot of people don't know they're domesticated. When you tell them, they're really angry because they're like, no, I'm not. It's like, well, interesting. Walk outside this line. What line? You mean the wall? No, that's a lot. No, that's a wall. No, that's okay. And then when they walk outside the line, and I would say you, me, and Rob, because of our connection and the mentorship and the colleagueship and just the incredible connectivity, we've really tested a lot of the boundaries, and we found a lot of our boundaries as well. Like, wow, I am still constrained by this thought pattern, or I'm so constrained by this belief system. And I would say that more often than not, the low days, the down days, the frustration days, the depression days these days are when that happens, when I'm like, oh, I'm against something I thought wasn't there, but there it is. And it's holding me back without my consent almost, eh?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. One of the concepts that was introduced to me in holistic management from the HM, Holistic Management International perspective, was this idea of paradigms. And so, there's this idea of like getting outside your paradigm and stuff like that. But the funny thing is, like, you're always in a paradigm.
Yeah.
And it's just when you find the edges of that, you break out of it, you're just in a bigger box. And it's just about, but I mean, and I'm the same way. Like when I find one of those edges and I start rubbing up against it, there's always that, essentially there's a death that needs to take place, and a rebirth, whether that's the death of your ego, or a death of a belief, or a death of a relationship, or some pattern that has started. It needs to, that needs to die so that you can go beyond that. And just our culture's relationship to death is a whole other conversation.
It's a tough one. We're happy to die slow. Like, we're happy to watch other people, or sometimes watch ourselves hurt or kill ourselves slowly and softly. But quick, we have a problem with, eh? Like, we're not too stoked about that quick situation. And so it's when we come up against boundaries, those boundaries of the box outside the box, and being like, well, I'm still inside a box. And then having the transcendent thought that kind of takes us over all of it, which is, you can never not be outside a complete box. You're always within inside of a box. So the advantage there is understanding the box you're in. Okay, so what is this box? How does it constrain me? Where can I bend and break the rules? It reminds me of The Matrix, where it was like the little kid talking with Keanu Reeves being like, don't try and bend the spoon. That's impossible. Only realize the truth. What's the truth? There is no spoon. And I think moments like that, where I've like those kind of moments where it's just been like, I know Kung Fu, right? You have those moments where it's like, business can be anything you want. It's really easy to create business. There are these confines and constraints about life and societal pressures and conversations that are just that. They're just societally constructed. And as much as you adhere to them is as much as they can contain you. You can and cannot have certain conversations with certain people. Another one of those interesting boundaries that I've really played out the edges of. And just every time I push it, I just recently was visiting my father for his 60th birthday party, and I saw all of my old scout leaders. Like all the guys who were like twice or second removed surrogate fathers who, influenced me for better or for worse. And I was sitting there, I was really trying to take them in, because I had such respect and such love for all of these guys. Like, they're just exceptional people in their own right. And all of a sudden somebody was like, what did they say? They were like, well, there's such a thing as a pink job and a blue job. And I was like, what? Like, because I've never heard that before. I've de-Albertanized myself. And so I haven't heard this. And he's like, well, there's jobs for girls and there's jobs for boys. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Why do you believe that? Well, are you stupid? It's like, that's fascinating. That's a really interesting conversation. Like, you have this, like, you can see these little worlds that people live in, right? And then you pull back the scope and you pull back the scope and you pull back the scope. And it's like, you're living in a world that is completely by your own means. It's by the inputs you read and understand. And all these guys were going off being like, yep, took me a long time to realize I was a redneck. It's like, didn't take me that long. I realized that pretty quickly. And yet these are all men I appreciate and I love. And I had this great conversation with them about what they were talking about and kind of like pushing on the sandcastle. Like, is this actually a sandcastle? Because it feels like a sandcastle. This feels like something has entered into your mind and you're repeating ad nauseum. And you're saying it because it makes you feel secure or in place or conversational. And any offering of dialogue, like, oh, that's interesting, what's that about, was immediately met with, well, of course it's that way. It's like, okay, no dialogue, because you don't want to transgress upon that boundary, because on the other side is the unknown, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you find that, because you work with like a ton of farmers, and quote unquote farmers are conventional, but yet the number of the people who you work with tend to be a little bit more alternative in nature. You must have some pretty interesting conversations with farmers.
Definitely. And you know, just on that that line, something just kind of idea popped in my head. One of the recent books that I read that I got a ton of value out of was a book called Your Brain at Work by David Rock. Have you read this one, Devin?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you were probably the one that told me to read it. Anyways, it's a fascinating book that there's a lot of, interesting models, and just even the way that it's written is very unique. But probably the most valuable thing that I got out of the book was were all these insights about the human brain and how the human brain functions. And so, David Rock kind of puts it this way, that the human beings are evolved from a species of animals that paid a lot of attention to a rustle in the bushes. And we also evolved as a species. We are, of all the species on planet Earth, we are dependent upon our social groups for longer and more more in depth than almost any other organism on the planet. And as a result, we have developed very strong social dependencies and kind of social muscles, if you will. And primarily the brain is that's actually one of the theories that I think Yari talks about, is that the brain was basically evolved to deal with the complexity of social structures. Anyways, a lot of folks are probably familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where there's like basic needs like food, water, shelter, and like those are at the base of the pyramid and they're the most important. And as you go up the pyramid, kind of on the way to self-actualization and stuff like that, those things are less important, but they're, because it makes sense, right? That you would, food and shelter are the most important things. Anyways, one of the insights about the brain was that social needs are actually just as important, if not more, than the need for food, shelter, water, things like that. And one of the examples that he gives is that, if you think back in your memory of a time where you were treated unfairly, you were cheated by somebody, the emotion that kind of comes up is like this, really visceral, like inner stomach feeling. And it's the same part of your brain that is triggered when you eat something that's rotten is the same part of your brain that's triggered when you perceive something that's unfair. So anyways, he has this model called the SCARF model, which is status, certainty, autonomy, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, which are the five social metrics that are in the same primary needs groups as food, shelter, and water.
Mm.
And that framework has given me an unbelievable amount of insight into my own brain and how I think and understand the world, but also how other people think and understand the world. And one of the things that you were just talking about is how when you ask a question about that's interesting, where does that belief come from, and you're immediately met with basically a dogmatic response or something that's very defensive. You could argue that and you say so because on the other side of that there's this uncertainty, and the human brain doesn't like uncertainty because it's one of our primary needs, and we evolved from a group of animals that paid a lot of attention to a rustle in the bushes. Except we don't have tigers and lions and bears hunting us anymore. We have unread email messages and somebody not liking our post on Facebook. Those are the kinds of things, or not knowing what you're doing this weekend. Those are the social stresses. But I mean, you and I both know people who have anxiety attacks around just not knowing, what's around the corner, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, so just that understanding of how important those kind of 5 social metrics are for myself and for other people has shifted in a huge way how I relate to other people. And I used to think that conventional farmers were bad, and that they knew what they were doing, and I had all these beliefs around who they were as people. And then when I started to work with them as clients, I realized that these people are they're just like you and me. They're stuck in a rat race, and they have all these pressures around them, and a lot of them want to change, but they don't know how, because there are all these social peer pressure and financial stress and all these other things that are affecting them. And what I found is when you meet that with compassion, understanding, and from a position of trying to strengthen them and giving them a holistic context so that they can start testing their decisions and working it from that place, I just had phenomenal results from that. In fact, one of the last folks that I worked with, they've been farming a section of land, 640 acres, for over 30 years. And that entire time they've been conventional, and the only 2 crops that they grew were genetically modified canola and wheat for basically 30 years. And after, it would be about 3 or 4 months of work around, permaculture design and goal setting and things like that, on their own volition, with no pressure from me at all, they've decided to start transitioning their land into organic. And literally, it was like the one day they said to me is like, we were testing a decision one day, and we realized that the way that we're farming isn't in alignment with our goals. And it wasn't me pointing at them or holding a picket sign outside their farm saying, you guys are bad, you need to change. It was just like, here's some tools. And it was amazing. I didn't expect it at all.
I think that's what's so fascinating about the tools that are alive and well right now, the tools that you use, the tools that I use. So much of it is do it yourself. Like it's take it up, use it, and start to create experience. And we've talked about this before, but information complexes into knowledge with context. So once you have context and information, you get knowledge. Experience plus knowledge equals wisdom. And when you give somebody the tool of context, a way to take a look at the entire project you're managing, your life, your land, your business, and then a sense of what is it you want in the future, and then a way to test those decisions against good testing questions that talk about what's the root cause, is this going to have the most amount of effort towards what you want, what does the gut feel like? They can produce results for themselves, right? It's kind of like giving somebody an exercise plan instead of moving their body for them and like going through the motions. And then it's a hands-off conversation. They do it themselves. It reminds me of a client you had. I think it was right when we were working on context, and they had sent you this big long email, and they were kind of like this, like every other time. They're like, we want pigs, now we want chickens. And it was just really like Takota infatuation. It was like, we want this because you have this. And we want this because you have, like, how human, right? I want what this is. The grass is greener over there. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, well, what do I have right here? And is grass even the good idea? Or am I eligible for something else? That idea of eligibility. I remember you were kind of going along with it for a while, and then you're like, wait a second, have you run this through your context? I've given you a tool already to play with this. And they did it. They went through and they came back to you on their own volition saying, pigs aren't for us.
Yeah, that came back, and the whole thing was actually farming is not for us. And they decided to go do something else. But yeah, it was just funny. It was like I was trying to kind of convince them and rationalize with them and do all this work, when really it was just the simple question is, have you tested this against your host goal? Really simple. That's now my go-to response to most of the questions that I have with clients. It seems really until the first time you say it to a client, they're like offended. And then they actually go and do the work, and then you come back and you ask them again. They're like, "Yeah, we did, and we had all these insights." And then the next time, like, you say it to them, they're like, "Oh, we totally forgot about it." And then the third time, you don't even really have to say it because they've already done it.
Yeah, that's really the funny thing. This was something that I picked up after I was doing some interviewing of holistic management practitioners, be they HMI guys, Holistic Management International, or Savory Institute. Is that when you ask them, like, how much do you use your context? 25% of them out of 100% were like, yeah, we use it sometimes. And everybody else was like, we never use it.
Yeah.
And I think what it is that, at least when I was learning about it, it was, here's a neat idea, but there was no process, right? There was no step by step by step by step by step. And the way that I've envisioned context and passed it on to you, and then you've passed it back, and it's been really cool to bounce it back and forth. And then the way I took context, I took a huge amount from Dan Palmer of Very Edible Gardens. He reached out this past year and was like, I love what you're doing. So we've been bouncing stuff back and forth. And I'm seeing a lot of innovation going on, be it from the weekly planners and bringing context into those, or the yearly planners and bringing context into that. But also, and Jen, who's on live right now, just talking about we're all in this together and we're all just walking each other home, is that compassion is actually the highest level of response. It's the black belt of response. It's not like, you're an idiot. That's like I don't even get a belt because I'm just not trying. And yet most of us, especially from Alberta, because I was Alberta born and raised, and so are you, I think we're taught that. Like, that's one of the metrics. It's like, how many times you can tell a guy that he's an idiot and just get her done, sort of the Alberta way. And yet these days, I find there's more and more things that I hear people saying, being like, I would like to respond unfavorably. But like doing the big deadlifts are responding compassionately and thinking, okay, where are they coming from? And what's their thought pattern? And what's that conversation about? Because, flipping somebody the bird verbally really quickly doesn't produce anything of value for either person. And then when we come back to metrics, this idea of metrics, it's like, okay, how much of a cool head did I collect myself? And did I keep my presence of mind? This is the big conversation in Vipassana meditation, which, again, if the stories are to believe, because they're 2,600-year-old stories, this is what the Buddha taught. And the only thing the Buddha taught was Vipassana meditation, which was just, be aware and respond with compassion. And when I think about the amount of effort that takes, that takes more effort than anything else I do. Mm-hmm. And when I keep my balance of mind, when I keep the balance of my mind, that dictates everything. And you were talking about, right before we got online, about recently kind of had a moment, sort of a dip, and you used the testing questions again to kind of take a look at metrics and what was going on. And it brought you out of that. And you just said it to me on the fly. And a couple of questions that came up for me was there one question, or was there one sort of aha moment or multiple aha moments about what that was, or did you kind of see the negative and the positive in that contrast piece? I'm curious about how that process worked for you.
Yeah, so this actually happened today, and one of the have you seen that image from Damien Newman about his process of design, where it starts out as if you pull it up, but it's basically I believe he was an architect. And he was trying to explain like the design process of like building a house, or coming up with a concept. And most people think it's like this linear process where like there's like research, and then there's like prototyping, and then like iterations of designs, and then like the build, and it's just this linear process. And he had this insight where it's like in reality it looks like a rat's nest on this end, and then eventually things start to smooth out, and it kind of trails off, and it's like steady. It's like that is Rob was the first one to show me that image. And it blew my mind, because that's exactly what design and permaculture design or life design or just life in general is all about. And yet we have these expectations that I'll get an idea, I'll research something for 2 hours, I'll be an expert, and I'll make a series of really good decisions, or I'll codified steps, and then I'll be at my goal. And then when that doesn't happen, and there's uncertainty, and all these other problems start to come up, we immediately go into these, or at least I do, into these dialogues of, it's like, what am I doing? Is this right for me? And it's just like basically a miniature panic attack. And so now whenever that pattern pops up for me, yeah, that's the one there. It was Damien Newman, right?
That's who it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now, and this pattern has been like, now this image has brought clarity for me for like years of struggle, particularly in like, permaculture design and integrated design. And so now kind of my process whenever that happens is I just, one of the other insights about the brain from the Your Brain at Work is that reappraisal is one of the most powerful tools that we have for just being happy in life. And so as opposed to, thinking that you're stupid or that you're not an expert, or that, this isn't going to work. I just tell myself, this is normal. I'm learning something I've never learned before, and there's going to be a few hiccups, and this is good. The feedback that I'm getting right now, the failures are signposts on my way of clarity. And I basically picture this image in my mind. So that brings you back down a little bit closer until I can figure out what it is that I'm struggling with. And for myself, I'm in the process of designing my own house that I'm going to be building this spring. And I'm just past the kind of concept. I have a concept plan developed, and now I'm getting quotes. And I was actually meeting with my brother today, who's an incredible carpenter, and I was running through my designs and budgets with him. And he as always, there's another perspective that has a way of looking at a problem. And he just gave me a few ideas of what if you did this with your north wall? What if you use these kind of materials? What if you use this style of truss? Things that I just hadn't thought of. And it immediately, like when he left, I was thrown into that, oh shit, more options. I got to go back into the research phase and do more of that. And I didn't want to. And I reappraised. And, but I also, it brought up the question of just, is this a decision? Should I be building a house right now? And so I ran through those 7 testing questions. There wasn't really one in particular, like was just kind of all in mind. And is my audio Leg here.
Hey, Takota, are you there?
Yeah. Can you? I'm just getting.
Yeah, you're...
I got poor connection here.
Yeah, I'm getting quite a garble on my end. I don't know if that's what's happening live or not.
That's happening. Just give me a second. I can't paste back my computer.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm back now.
Takota, you're still pretty broken up, mate.
Yeah, just give me a second.
Okay.
You might have my computer. Cool.
It's all that Farintosh internet that's going on right now. Susan, with you listening, am I broken up as well, or is it just Takota? Okay, I'm clear. Okay, interesting. Did your computer get too hot? Is that what you're doing? You got an ice pack going on?
Just gonna kill my video here.
Okay, let's see if that helps us out.
Yeah, the last couple of days, my I got a problem with my fan or something. It's like a brand new computer, less than a year old, and it can't regulate its temperature properly or something.
Okay, mate. We're getting a report that you're unintelligible, very intelligent, but unintelligible. Do you want to potentially just call in?
That's another option.
Yeah. Why don't I get you to call in, and maybe what we'll do is we'll get you on there and see if that works out for us.
Or is that working better now?
Oh yeah. I don't know what you did. You just cleaned up the pipe.
Yeah. Well, it's these frozen berries, man.
See Buckthorn to the rescue again.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool, man. Nice. Well, now that we got you back, I think what I want to do is kind of round back around to your conversation about taking that decision-making conversation, that process, and how that helped you go through the issue. Did we still got you, or did we lose you? Oh yeah. Yeah, that's pretty gnarly, man. Just go into the chat here. I'm going to pick up the number to call in if we can't get you on there.
I've got on my phone.
Yeah, you can just call in then.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So I think you'll have to make me a host there.
Yeah, so switch the host back over to me, and I'll take out one of you.
Okay, there we go. I just left.
Oh, that's beautiful. That was good. That was like right into the frustration.
Yeah.
Good deal. Okay. Well, it's just my lovely face now. Thanks so much for putting me on the spot. That was nice. Like as you're talking, I'll move my mouth so it makes it sound like, or like do puppets as you're speaking. Anyway, so we were talking about how it was just today, you were feeling a little lost in the woods, and the testing questions were helping you out. And I think you were connecting a little bit of that, of kind of coming back into the rat's nest a little bit and trying to see what it was that was the issue and how you were able to come out of it. So I'll let you hit it again.
Definitely. So I was saying my process now for recognizing those patterns is to reappraise and just to basically be compassionate with myself and the place that I'm at. But then also to recognize that, that feeling of hitting up against a boundary is also an indicator of that perhaps a decision that I have made in the past or that I'm in the process of making may not be right for me. Because there's always that possibility, is that, the feeling of kind of being overwhelmed or just doubt can also be just an early indicator of a wrong decision, right? And so now whenever that happens, I retest kind of whatever decision brought about that feeling, just to re-clarify it. And I find that it really helps.
You said something important there, and I want to pick up on it. It's about boundaries. It's about how boundaries and constraints in design, from land design or life design, are both not just important, but essential. Like if we don't have boundaries around the life design, if we don't have boundaries around the land design, we're going to kind of fall off the edge of the map. And that squiggly diagram is really about how there's constraints, and the constraints help to constrain the rat's nest. And I see that Jen was saying here that she feels like she's totally in the rat's nest. And I just said, we all are about something at some point. Like we never really leave the rat's nest. It's about enjoying or finding enjoyment within the uncertainty to say, wow, something else I didn't know. That's really interesting. That's really curious to me. I just had a random conversation with a good friend of mine who out of the blue said, hey, do you want to come and take a look at this piece of land? And normally I have a process. I have a good fit call. I have, we've talked about this a bunch about how we enter people into and out of the work we do. And I was kind of leaning back on that. He's like, yeah, I'm going out there tomorrow. I'm happy to pick you up from your house and just go out. And then he told me what the full scope of the project was. And I was like, oh, no, I will come. That sounds amazing. I'd love to be a part of that. And yet after the call, I got off, and I've been really good about being really specific about metrics, about how much to take on. We talked about this last week about the yearly calendar, juggling all the things that are important. And I really had this moment like, I can't believe you just said yes to this.
Yeah.
And then I took a step back and I said, well, what are the metrics of success for this? And we talk about this. We talk about after you make a decision, what is a metric that shows that this is a positive, or what would be a metric that would show that this is a negative? So really giving ourselves warning lights, good, warning lights, bad. And I was thinking immediately, it's like, well, if me and this colleague of mine immediately are like, wow, that was so worth it just to spend some time together. Beyond just, we get to walk in a beautiful snowy place. It potentially might become this incredible, I don't know how much I can say, so I'm just going to have to leave it there. But the other thing was like, well, what if I come back and I'm totally frustrated? Okay, well, that'd be interesting. And that'll be something to measure and to mark. But the base metric, and I talked about this with a family friend of my partners, a family member of my partners, and they were having problems with dating. and they were talking about, oh, I just like dating, such a pain in the neck. There's always somebody who's, just totally out to lunch. And I said, well, what do you do when you go on dates? And she said, well, I kind of leave it up to them. I said, well, that's kind of a waste. She goes, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're going to enjoy a day out, a moment out, why not do something you would do anyways and have a great time? And that's what I did. My dating conversation, it always worked out well. Obviously. And then similar with this gentleman, it's like, we're going to go walk in a beautiful space in the snow. I'm going to talk to him. He's just been on some travels. I'm going to have just been traveling. I'm going to stretch my legs almost immediately. Fantastic. This is an exceptionally good piece of value to bring into the conversation. This works out really well. Done. Like, bar none, we have good metrics and these metrics make sense.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting, because I find when people are creating context, life context or business context, there's only one metrics, and that's a dollar amount. And a friend of mine was talking about recently how they felt themselves a failure because one of their businesses wasn't producing enough capital. We kind of had a moment. I was like, look, think about all the capital you've produced. You've produced an incredible amount of social capital with the individuals you've brought around the work you've done. You've created an incredible amount of intellectual capital and experiential capital that you've parlayed into designing and designs. And we really do lose sight when we don't have really well-defined metrics about what success means.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
What's one of the biggest metrics that you've changed in your life for the better? Like, what's a metric you were using that was providing only stress and strife and frustration? And what's a metric that you've adopted that has allowed you to be more focused, more able, more productive?
I can't think of a specific one before. How's my audio coming through?
Your audio and your visual now is exceptional. You going off your phone?
Yeah. Nice. I can't think of what my metrics were beforehand, but the general theme of how I made decisions before was about whether or not my actions would please other people.
Mm.
And anyway, so that's kind of like the general theme, and I'm sure there's a bunch of different ways we could take that. But now, one of the most important metrics that I have, and it's one that I developed in the work with you that really captures like the feeling of when everything is going right, is that basically this idea that I feel like life's happening in slow motion. Like that for me is like the one thing that I can look at. It's my one benchmark that lets me know immediately how everything else in my life is doing. And it's just been incredible. And so now whenever I feel like my life is starting to speed up, kind of like I feel the boulder just crest the hill and it's about to start going down the other side, that's when I start putting on the brakes and start trying to kind of problem solve and diagnose why things are starting to speed up and figure out where to stop that. And it's funny that you mentioned the taking on a recent project. And one of the things that I'm really good at now is that if I commit to something kind of on the spot, when somebody asks me and it's like, oh yeah, that sounds really great. And then in hindsight, like I sit down and I start to feel like life's starting to speed up again. I'll call that person back and I'll uncommit.
Mm.
Or I'll, maybe there's something else in my schedule that needs to go so I can make room for this new thing, which is something that I never did before. I was always trying to please other people and my kind of my own quality of life always came second. And now with that new metric, I found that like it's kind of counterintuitive that I'm actually far more helpful to other people when I look after myself first. And there's that great saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. And it's so true. And when we don't acknowledge that, and we start to erode our own kind of energy source, we're actually shortchanging the people in our lives that need us the most. So that, that's been a really, really big one for me. And I don't feel guilty about it. And I'll call that person back or write him an email and say, look, like, I just, I can't, I've got too much on my plate right now. Let's keep the dialogue open and we'll go from there. But, and like, when I'm done that, I feel like amazing and life starts to slow down again.
Well, the big thing about that is that you've put yourself first all of a sudden. It's like, what works for me has to become first. And what's so interesting is I was just talking about this with a client just before, and their exact question was, how do you reconcile with holistic context decisions you've already made that you no longer want to keep committed to? And just the fact that somebody would ask that question is like, you uncommit.
Yeah.
Right. There's this amazing programming that we have to do what we say that we said we would do, even at the detriment to ourselves. No, we don't. Mm-hmm. And what was even more hilarious is right before that call, I had another call with Joe Tobias of Root Shoot Design, and we're developing 2 soil courses called Super Soil, The Art and Science of Compost, and Super Soils, The Living Soil, really trying to make the idea of biological activity within soil very easy to understand from lay folks, because some of the pioneers of this tend to get a little heady and get into the weeds really quickly. And secondarily, most people don't know how to make really good compost from a biological inoculum perspective. And I was sitting there and I was starting to feel this like really amazing intensity in my chest, because I was like, there's too many things going on right now. There's no way this is going to be an enjoyable situation. And I got myself into this moment where I was like, when I get on the call, I have to talk to Joe about putting off the second course and just focusing on the composting course, and like picking up the second course sometime in the fall if we do again, right? Like we did all this work and we made sure that the potential for that course, even from the outset, would just be going through the exercise, not putting it out, but just clarifying in our minds what we wanted to say about living soil, be it in my own teaching or consulting, or her own teaching or her own consulting. So we already made our metrics at the beginning, right? And this composting course we're doing now about the art and science of compost is so great. It's like so easy. It's like, we're going to go, we've got all the materials together. We're going to show how to build exceptionally good compost with materials you can find. We're going to show how to test it. And then as we build this compost, like every time we turn it, she's going to take a sample. We're going to look at it underneath the microscope, have all the critters available to be seen and identified. And I never saw that in what I was seeing. And even there, those are the metrics that within this living soil food web conversation that people are saying, this is the important piece. And I've come to know that that's true for myself. But unless you see those metrics increase or those metrics decrease, you don't really know. Mm-hmm. And I think this just all kind of boils down to this idea of metrics, of if you don't design your life, somebody else will design it for you, and they will design it by metrics that don't serve you. They will design it by metrics that improve and gamify your life for their aims, not your aims. If you're only focused on the dollar in your bank account, you're going to be a great GDP producer, gross domestic product producer, but you're not going to be a good Takota producer. You're not going to produce 25 units of life moves in slow motion, right? Right. Life moves in slow. I don't know the acronym of it, but I don't think I'm that intelligent to pick that up right away. But that's the main piece, right? Like the genuine happiness indicators of Takota are going to be different than the genuine happiness indicators of Javan, which is going to be different than the genuine happiness indicators of Grassroots Family Farm. Yep. Because each hole has a different perspective and a different aim and a different purpose. And that bullseye is going to look different for you as opposed to the farm. Like you as an individual, we talked about this, where it's like, you need to be connected to the land. You need to be helping to produce. And the specifics of what you're producing are kind of malleable. Yeah, you've really enjoyed your breeds and you're enjoying that conversation. But if for, let's say, a year or two, you had to step away from that to make sure that your life was exceptional, you would do that. And that's something that I think a lot of people forget, is that as farmers or designers or soil consultants, it's not about the fact that you're producing soil or producing compost or producing animals. it's that you're completely engaged and stoked, and this is a byproduct, right? This business is a byproduct, and yet we work in reverse.
Yeah, it's really strange, and this is a pattern that I had identified in myself, and I see in almost everybody else that I work with. And I think I mentioned this in the last call, but one of the feedback that I keep getting from folks that I'm working with, when I ask them, what's the most valuable thing that you got out of our work together, it's consistently somewhere along the lines of, you gave us permission to say no.
Yeah.
Which is strange, because and that permission stems from the holistic context of the holistic goal work. but even more than that, it was challenging people to actually use it, like after they had created it, and it was to ask them tough questions like, why are you doing this enterprise? Why are you going to farmers markets 7 days a week, losing money every time? Why are you doing that? Does it make you happy? And it's like what's the end game? Are you doing it to gather clients? Are you doing it just because that's what farmers do? They go to farmers markets.
Right.
And so it's just again, coming back to these metrics, is like once people set their own metrics and they have a process for monitoring them, it really becomes quite simple and a lot of fun.
I love what you said there. And I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up a little bit about kind of metrics and the metrics that are important and how we play them off. Because I think that's incredible. When I was doing permaculture design courses, the feedback I got from people was, you're giving us permission to try. And I get the same feedback about context. You're giving us permission to say no. And you and I have talked about this, how context, permaculture, and really PA Yeoman's keyline design process, which is a whole process, not just the plow, right? It includes scale of permanence, but those three together in the center is something really incredible happens within those three. And of course, the Regrarians, and Darren has done so much, Darren Doherty of the Regrarians has done so much to advance the conversation about scale of permanence. But those three give us so much, and losing one of them is losing a lot of hope and a lot of motivation. And this is where I kind of contend with a couple of friends of mine, Curtis Stone and Diego Footer, who are kind of like, permaculture is garbage. Just wholesale, like, let's just throw the baby out. It's like,
yeah,
yes, I love you dearly, both of you, but there's something about the inherence of hope, the inherence of possibilities, the inherence of incredible motivation that permaculture gives people. It's like, there's possibilities again. There's the clouds are opening up, the trees are parting, we're seeing a little bit of light, and we have an idea about potentially what we could do. And then thinking of it this way, it's kind of like holistic management and Regrarians or keyline design or the scale of permanence tempers that sort of unbridled, like, I will swale everything. Herb spirals as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
Composting toilets is all you need. And those types of design systems really say, well, sometimes the best thing to do is nothing. And that's where I think Masanobu Fukuoka really comes in, is that he really started with that idea of do nothing can sometimes be the most powerful thing. And that's where good contemplative filtering, good monitoring, good metrics really gives us the justification to do nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And another quote of his that I find really poignant is he said that the biggest problem in modern agriculture is that a farmer doesn't have time to write a poem. And for me, like that just summarizes a lot of this stuff and a lot of the patterns I've seen in myself and with other people, is that when we're stuck on that wheel and we're going around, when we're overcommitted, we're underpaid and overworked, it's like, how do we make space to make any change? And and permaculture is if it's guilty of anything, it's of giving people hope to do the impossible. and to say yes to everything. If it's guilty of anything, that's what it's guilty of.
Absolutely.
And and so, you know, just the one of the analogies that I use is like permaculture is this, you can think of it as this incredible toolbox full of snap-on tools. It's like, you know, the best quality tools you can imagine. And holistic management or holistic context gives you the wisdom to not use a 2-inch crescent wrench like a sledgehammer.
Yeah. That's such an important piece. And it brings me to the idea that we need to be aware of our tools, and we need to be aware of ourselves as tools. And so the old adage is, if the carpenter only knows how to use the hammer, he'll go out and all he'll see is nails. But if you take a step back from that and say, wait a second, who am I as a hammer? What am I well suited to do? What am I eligible to do? And then just go out and find nails. Now, all of a sudden, you're kind of turning it on its head. And I think that's where true genius comes in. And Jen had a great last question here as we wrap up. Do either or both of you resonate with this? I heard someone say that the other day, that you should not create a business to help other people. You should create one to help yourself. 100%. And I think Derek Sivers said it best in Anything You Want. Your business is your version of utopia, not only for everybody out there, but for you yourself. And it should be your highest ideal. That doesn't mean you have to struggle and do a bunch of extra work to make sure your burn rate's taken care of that maybe you don't want to do. I'm not saying that we don't live in a fantastic world. In that sense, sometimes we have to do that work. But at the end of it, we really do have an ability to create anything we want. And we should focus on that, because if we are going to shoot for anything, we should focus on that conversation. So I think unless there's anything else you want to say, mate, I'm just going to ask folks who are listening just to give the video a like if you are keen, and definitely leave a comment talking about maybe something that was of value, helps other people jump in. And Takota, thanks again for just jumping on the line with me. I think both of us, we talked about this after the last call, like, wow, that was easy. That was really fun. We had a good time. And then I just checked into the comments from last one, and there was actually another comment just saying that was really great. I listened to a bunch of this while I was pruning, and thanks so much. And I just really appreciate when people reach out and give that kind of feedback, because it's great, and leave the comments. So feel free to leave a comment, subscribe. Helps us to keep going and doing what we're doing. And if there's a specific thing you want us to talk about next week, javan@allpointsdesign.ca. If there's something about context you wanted us to dive a little bit deeper in, or if there's something else, go for it. But basically, we're going to take this 1 week at a time. And if something's interesting to Takota or to me, then we're going to chat about it. And maybe next week we'll get into China's social credit system, a Yelp score, and the nanny state that is going to be mandatory by 2020. Which is a social credit score that will allow you to have more freedom and access in society or not. And I would call that a very poor metric for life. I'll probably try to get myself out of that situation. But that's right. Dakota, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you spending the time with me here. And thanks for everybody who came and watched. Really appreciate you guys chatting on the sidebar. Thanks to Susan and Jen and whoever the mysterious third person was who we didn't hear from. But and the other fourth person, yeah, this was a big moment. All the good people coming together. Thanks so much, folks. Really appreciate it. Takota, anything else you want to send us off with? Maybe a farming poem, as you said.
I don't have any good ones memorized. Actually, this is a one that I kind of wrote myself, and it's you started off the the conversation about is agriculture was agriculture a good idea? And so this is one that I wrote that I end off a lot of my courses with, is that the ultimate goal of farming is the end of fences and feedlots. End of fences and feedlots, townships and ranges, I think is how it goes. But basically, it's just like as we dive deeper into the understanding the natural world and ourselves and and how really agriculture has just been this giant domestication process and really a downgrading of productivity of all the ecosystems on the planet, including the human ecosystem. It becomes readily apparent that agriculture was a horrible, horrible idea. But that being said, there's a process that there's going to be a transition to getting back to kind of the Garden of Eden, and I can't wait.
Well, you don't have to wait. I've been to your place. Every time I'm there. Thanks so much, Takota. It's such a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks so much to everybody who came. Same bat time, same bat channel next week, 6 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Mountain Standard. If you like this, leave a like, leave a comment. Feel free to take the channel link and put it up onto social media and say, we loved listening to this week. Highly recommend you come next week, because we're just going to keep going for at least 6 episodes. They're going to be our pilot episodes. And then if we've run out of things to say and we're just looking at each other, we'll stop. And if we find more places to play, then we'll play a little bit more. But I'll tell you this, I was dead tired before this. I've been visiting family. I've been just like so sleepy, and this totally revitalized me. So thanks very much, Takota. It's such a pleasure, man.
Yeah, always.
Awesome.
Take care, Javan.
Take care, everybody. Thanks so much. Be fruitful.
Bye, folks.
Multiply.